Tonight, we turn our attention to Alzheimer's, a disease that afflicts an estimated 5.8 million Americans. And in 2019, it's estimated that it will cost $290 billion. And that doesn't account for all of the unpaid care that loved ones provide to people with Alzheimer's. It's a very pressing topic that I think touches all of us in one way or another. Either we have someone that has suffered from it, or we're worried about how we can keep from developing Alzheimer's ourselves. And we are so honored to have with us two people to speak on this topic this evening. Dr. Michal Beeri is with the Sheba Medical Center in Israel. She's also a professor of psychiatry at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York. She will present first, and when she's done with her presentation, she will be joined in conversation with Dr. Samantha Holden, who is a neurology professor at CU Boulder. She is also affiliated with the University of Colorado Movement Disorders Clinic, as well as their Alzheimer's Research and Clinical Center. At the end of our program tonight, as we do with all of our programs, we will open it up at that time for audience Q&A. But right now, please help me welcome Dr. Michal Beeri.
Okay. Can you hear me well? We discovered today that my ear is very little and that this mic doesn't sit well on it. So this title was primarily to bring you here. And what I'm going to try to do, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to say, yes, we have a pill to prevent Alzheimer's disease, but I do want to give hope that we're in the right direction after having been many, many years taking directions that haven't been so productive in terms of treatment and prevention of the disease. So I'll walk you through our thought process, and at the end, as we said, together with Dr. Holden, we're gonna ask questions and receive questions from the audience. And I've been told that at the very end, Samantha and I can go to the very end there, and people can come on a more personal level, which quite often happens after those talks, okay? So let me I'm gonna ask a few questions. Because the light is on me, I'm not gonna see you guys, but I'm gonna have to believe what you're saying. One question, and be honest. Please raise your hand if you never forget names. There was one. He raised his hand. But you got confused. You said, all right. So I'm asking this question because quite often, almost always, people say, oh my God, I'm forgetting names. I have Alzheimer's disease. Forgetting names is, as you see here, nobody raised their hand, okay? And what happens when nobody ever, or let's say the other way, when everybody at some point forget names? It means that that's the norm. It's an annoying norm. It's annoying, it's embarrassing. It started happening to me, and it's striking, and like, the name is not there. Or when in conferences, I'm becoming very expert in getting my eyes like this, see the name, and say, hey, John, how are you, right? But the reality is that when we are 300 or more people here, forget at some point some names. This is the norm. It's an annoying or stressful problem, but it's not something that reflects Alzheimer's disease. Let me see if I have, do I have it? Yeah. In Alzheimer's disease, it's qualitatively different. You forget who the person is, okay? You have a hard time. You see the person, you say, it's familiar. It takes you a time, if at all, the capacity to remember who that person is. So let's go on with similar questions. You know what, this one is a little different. Let's say you were in a bar mitzvah party, let's say wedding. Wedding is more general. Let's do, you were in a wedding last May 12th, 2018. And you can't remember the date of the wedding. Is that a concerning memory problem? No, it isn't at all, okay? If you forget that there was such a wedding, or if you forget who were getting married, that becomes serious and concerning. Forget that the party happened at all, or forget what was the purpose of the party, all right? And I mean, the keys is less of an issue because we try to put them always in the same place, but most of us some point forget where the hell we put the keys, and that is not a concerning memory problem. If we forget what to do with the keys, okay, with an Alzheimer's disease patient, with a relatively advanced stage, you can see an Alzheimer's patient taking a key, going to the door, understanding that the door and the key have to do with each other and not understanding what to do with it, okay? It's a qualitative difference from just a general forgetfulness. Now let me give you an example, all right? Is there anybody here, and I hope I'm not embarrassing, or I would say just be proud. Who is above the age of 90 here? Do we have anybody above 90? I can't see here, so I don't know, and on this side there is nobody. Where am I? Okay, you are my cherry on the cream, okay? I'll ask you a question, all of you. Is a person who is 95 years old and is relatively cognitively normal, is that person able to learn new material? Sure, absolutely, okay? Learning is a natural process. It's a process that happens across the lifespan from the moment, in fact, even when we're still in the mummy's belly, and definitely in very old age. Learning is slower. The capacity of absorbing new material is smaller, and yet we want to see that learning curve, that learning new material over time. And I'll give you an example of how we work with it, which I think concretizes why learning is such an important factor for us to understand the disease. Imagine two people, I'm going to make them up, all right? So it's two guys, two men. They're both 75 years old. I'm really making them up, okay? They're both lawyers, and they both come with the same complaint. They both say, I have a memory problem, and I'm scared I'm developing Alzheimer's disease. We take the first guy, we give him a list of 10 words. We ask him to try to remember as many words as possible, and he remembers 5. And then we read the same list in a mixed up order, and we say, please tell us the words I remember now, and he remembers 7. And then the third time we do the same thing, and he remembers 9. And this is a learning curve we're expecting to see, 5, 7, 9. Each time he remembered more and more. With a 90 plus years old person, it might be 2, 3, and 4, but we still want to see that curve going up. The second guy comes in with the very same complaints, same age, same gender, same education, okay? And he says, I have a memory problem. I think I have Alzheimer's disease. We do the same thing. We give the 10 words. The guy remembers 5, just like the first one. And then we give him again 10 words, and he remembers 4. And the third time, he remembers 5. Did he have a learning curve? No, he didn't. And this is concerning, okay? Even if he did relatively well, we're expecting that each time he'll do a little better. And when that flat curve, or even sometimes going down, occurs, we get concerned. We say there is something in the capacity to absorb new information that is not working well. And this last one is one that everybody, again, is going to relate to. How many times you want to say something, the word is there, and it's not coming out. And you're like, and then most of us circumvent it, right? We say a whole long sentence so not to have to say the word, right? This is what we do. So this is, everybody's laughing because everybody relates to it, because it happens to the vast majority of us, if not to all of us. And when something happens to all of us, that's the norm. That's not the disease, all right? The typical thing is that 2 hours later, the day after, we say, darn it, that's what I wanted to say, or we go to the kitchen and we don't remember what we wanted, and then 2 hours later, oh, I forgot I wanted to do this or that. And in Alzheimer's disease, you forget and you don't remember, okay? And this is where we see I'm sorry, this is my little ear, as I was saying before. I know when I get it closer, it's better, but it keeps moving. Maybe I can work with a regular mic. It will be, well, let's see. I'll continue trying like this. If it bothers, then we'll change. So forgetting and not remembering is the phenomenology, a clinical symptom of Alzheimer's disease. And so I'll go through a little bit simplistically, but not very simplistically, across the different, or how a doctor diagnoses the disease, the typical clinical symptoms that we're expecting to see. Alzheimer's disease is a disease of memory. Okay, so if there isn't a formal memory impairment, it will not be Alzheimer's disease. It might be some other dementia. And let me take a minute, because many times it's a question, what is the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's disease? So dementia is an umbrella name for several diseases that look in many ways similar. A loss of cognition over time, then a loss of activities of daily living, of normal functioning until the person goes, okay? Now, those different diseases are characterized by different pathologies in the brain. If we take 100 people who have dementia, 70 of them, or so, 70%, will have Alzheimer's neuropathology in their brain. And then another 15% will have mostly vascular disease in their brain, like tiny little strokes that then when aggregate, the person becomes demented. And then the other 15% are a whole variety of different pathologies, of Lewy body disease, of Pick's disease, of a TDP-43 different pathologies. And the clinical symptomatology for you, it's going to look, right, for each one of them will have some twitches, but overall, there is this neurodegeneration, a cognitive decline that eventually leads to death. In Alzheimer's disease, we do require to see a significant memory impairment, formally measured, because I just showed you, if you forget names or where you put your glasses, that's not formally measured. But we also expect at least one more cognitive impairment, okay? So it can be impairment in orientation in space, in orientation in time, in decision making, okay, our executive functions, which are located primarily in the frontal area of the brain, which really differentiates us from any other species. Understanding sense of humor. The whole issue of decision making comes very often through the family. Like sentences like, he can't even make a decision of what he wants for breakfast. And he really can't, because that decision making capacity is going away. We also expect to see a clear deterioration compared to the original state. And I'd like to give an example. We have a woman that participates in one of our studies. She is 94. She walks with pumps this high, no balance at all, but she has to look great. And she's incredible. And she still drives, okay? And one of the times she came to us, and she came late, and I got very concerned, and she said that she got lost. And I said, wait a minute, what do you mean you got lost? And she said, Michal, just don't worry about it. I got lost since I was born. All right, so if there isn't a change from a prior state or from prior capacity, that's not Alzheimer's disease. I have no orientation in space, okay? I get lost all the time, and I don't think that's Alzheimer's disease, so I hope. But the typical sentences will be, you have no idea who he was before, or if you had only known what was her memory 3 years ago, or things that make it very clear to us that the person has deteriorated compared to a year ago. And then we also want to see clear impairment in social, professional, and day-to-day life. Now, this professional, I'm going to take just a moment about this because it's something that has to do with the demographic change in the world. So until, let's say, 15, 20 years ago, you're 60, you're a woman, you're 60, you go home, you're 65, you're a man, you go home, right? And then the people who would see that there is a bad process happening to the memory of that person would be primarily family members. But today, people keep working, right? We have a family of 4 that we investigate through Mount Sinai. That the oldest is 103, and then there is 101, and then there is a 99 and a 98. The 98 guy, he is a lawyer that works with his son, grandson, and great-grandson, all of them in the same lawyer's firm or whatever company. The oldest lady, her name is Happy. And they work, I mean, I give the example of the lawyer because he's 98 years old and he continues working. So today the whole professional deterioration is something that became very relevant, and not unusually, the families hear for the first time that there is something wrong through co-workers that say his table, his desk was always very, very organized and it suddenly became a mess, or he has been missing meetings, all right? And finally, we want to make sure it's not something else. It's not a tumor, it's not a stroke, it's not a major vitamin deficiency or anything else. Now, this graph is essentially my, I've been lucky that I'm so passionate about what I do that I don't need much extra motivation, but this graph is definitely a major motivator to do Alzheimer's disease research and care. What you see here is the prevalence, is the frequency of the disease in the population. And just simplistically speaking, in the 65 to 69 years old range, you have 3 to 4% of the population that has Alzheimer's disease or dementia, okay, dementia in general. When you jump to 85 to 89 years old, it's 50%, all right? 50% of the people. Now, until 10 years ago, I would give a talk like this and say, do you know anybody who is 85 and above? And here and there, someone would raise his hand. Today, if I'll ask you, all of you will say, yes, I do have family members, friends, whoever, that are 85 and above. Those 85 and above are the fastest growing segment of the population in the Western world. All right, so if we don't do something, we're in big trouble. Just as you get a sense of numbers worldwide, in 2050, if we didn't resolve this or did something to prevent it, to diminish, to delay, there are going to be approximately 140, 150 million people in the world with Alzheimer's disease, which is an epidemic and a disaster by all and every means. Now, sometimes people tell me that, oh, well, but what if I made it to 90 and I don't have the disease? And probably I'm doing so well, I'm so strong, I didn't die from anything, and I didn't have Alzheimer's disease, then probably I won't have it ever. And the answer is that, unfortunately, that's not true. The prevalence of the disease keeps growing as we get older. There is a study from UC Irvine by my friend Claudia Killis, who is phenomenal, that she took 1,200 nonagenarians, 1,200 people above the age of 90, and she followed all of them to death, and the prevalence of the disease continues growing. Theoretically speaking, and I emphasize, theoretically speaking, if we prolong life long enough without finding solutions for this disease, we will all end up demented. Remember this statement, because I will give you some positive light at the very end of the talk, but no, the idea is that we can't release until this is resolved. That's the point. Oh, it's just one of them, it's Alzheimer's versus dementia as a whole, okay? It just say, so that's why I said Alzheimer's and then I say dementia as a whole. Alzheimer's is, it's a blue, yeah. So here is a major problem, not to say a disastrous problem for us, but also it has a bright side, is that over 460 molecules, medications have been tested for the treatment for Alzheimer's disease in the last decade, and none of them worked, okay? And we have to ask ourselves as scientists, as the field, what are we doing wrong? And we clearly are doing something wrong. And let me give you just a few minutes. It's neurobiology, but I'm gonna make it hopefully interesting, okay? So you get a sense of the names of the things that we deal with, all right? So the main pathology of Alzheimer's disease is called neuritic plaques, okay, or amyloid plaques. You probably have heard about amyloid, all right? This is an aggregation of a bad protein outside of the neuron. The neuron is the nerve cell, okay? So outside of the neuron, those plaques aggregate, and their aggregation causes neuronal death in a cascade. The second main pathology of Alzheimer's disease is called neurofibrillary tangles. They look like little fish when they're completely composed. And what it is, if the body of the neuron, let's say it's a circle, those are proteins that hold it in this shape. And a certain toxic process happens that degrades those or harms those proteins in a way that they lose their shape and the whole neuron collapses and dies, okay? So that we say this is an extracellular process and this is an intracellular process. Now, in addition, there is a major process that happens in the brain that happens naturally, and then in Alzheimer's disease, it gets out of order, let's say it that way. Our main immune cells in the brain are called microglia, and one of their jobs, among many, is to this is, by the way, from our own lab. This picture, this is from our Mount Sinai brain bank, so those are real human brains, and this is in vitro, this is in cell models. So this little weird shape is a microglia, and what you see inside this orange is amyloid that the microglia chopped and takes in, which is their job when they're working well. When they don't work well, they don't do it the right way, and they cause a bunch of other problems that seem to be causal to the disease. What you see here It says acetylcholine. We have a large number of different chemicals that work in the brain to make the brain function normally, okay? One of them is called acetylcholine. It's a neurotransmitter. This chemical goes down in Alzheimer's disease. We don't fully understand why, but it's the first neurotransmitter that goes down, and the medications that are out in the market today that are very limited in how they help the patients, they're based on increasing the amount of acetylcholine or maintaining higher levels of acetylcholine in the brain. And those are two neurons, two brain cells. The way they speak, they don't touch each other. The way they speak with each other is through several chemicals that go back and forth between them. And one set of those chemicals are synaptic proteins, which are low. Most of them are low. Some of them become high and shouldn't be high. But they're dysregulated in Alzheimer's disease. And finally, insulin signaling, which is a topic of great interest to our group, and I'll tell you in a minute why, is you remember that insulin is produced by the pancreas, which is far away from the brain, right? But the brain needs insulin for its survival in every possible level. The whole gray matter is fulfilled with insulin receptors that are waiting for insulin to come in. And because of several processes, some of them I'll discuss in a few minutes, insulin does not, or Alzheimer's patients have low level of insulin, and which cause a series of degenerative processes. So the medications, those 460, this is just a set of examples, but the medications worked on these kind of pathologies, and they have not been successful. So we try to understand what is that we're doing wrong, okay? And I brought 3 different directions that I thought would be interesting for us to discuss. The first one is genetic heterogeneity, okay? And what do we mean by that? When we do a clinical trial today, we bring in 3,000 Alzheimer's patients. Half of them go on a medication, half of them don't. We do not take, in most of the studies, there is a little beginning of taking into consideration certain genetics, but generally speaking, you bring all 3,000 Alzheimer's patients as if there is no genetic background that makes them different one from the other. So we think that we have to begin looking at Alzheimer's disease in many ways, and for many reasons, not as one disease. Remember cancer, right? Cancer was the disease, right? People didn't even say cancer. Today, if I'm not mistaken, only for breast cancer, just one type of cancer, there are 74 different protocols that you adapt them to that particular patient according to her genetic background. So we have to move in that way in Alzheimer's disease. The second thing is we might not be hitting the right biological target. So I showed you 6 biological targets that are main biological targets we have been working with in the last decade. All right? I said none of them has worked well. With the insulin, there is a tiny little hope still, but it's a study that had to be redone. And but several things have been learned through neuroimaging, through neurobiology in the last decade. For example, that the neurons, the cells, they speak to each other, right? The hippocampus, which is a region inside, on the level of inside of our ears in the brain, it's a tiny little organelle, let's say, inside the brain that is responsible, critical for memory consolidation. That region is connected to all the brain with different pathways. So when we look at a slide in the microscope, you don't see that. Those connections, or what we call connectivity, we cannot see in a microscope. We can see in other ways. We can measure in different ways. I'm going to talk about omics soon. Anybody here can raise their hand if they have heard about omics? Nobody. It does. It's just, and anybody here, you know what? Let me give you a hint. Genome. All right, so genomics is the study of whole the genome, including its interconnections, okay? So we, as I'm saying, there are different ways of looking at the brain that I think in many ways, thanks to our failure, we're opening up to look at, because we were so entrenched in saying this is a pathology and this is a pathology that we haven't looked in depth into. Admittedly, there are some investigators that have been fighting for those directions for many years, and now they're being heard. And the last or a third reason, let's say, is that when Alzheimer's disease is ascertained, it is too late to treat. And I'll show you a graph that hopefully will make you understand exactly what I mean, because I think this is a major issue, okay? This line here, the dotted line at the bottom, is similar to that graph that I showed you before with the green and blue or purple, all right? So at the early 60s, there is 2-3% that have Alzheimer's disease clinically, and at 85, it's about 50%, as I showed before. Now this black line here is the pathology. And what you see here is the pathology begins 20-30 years earlier. This gap is a gap of 20 to 30 years. So I ask, what is the point of treating a person when the person is ill if their biological disease have started 20 to 30 years earlier? And now, and this is, I believe, remember now, because I'm going to show in the next slide, I want to focus on the risk factors for a moment, but that a major point that I'm going to try to make is that prevention is a direction with a potential true success in the Alzheimer's disease field. Now, those are modifiable, 7 main modifiable risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. And this is a major take-home message for you. Please listen. I remind you what I said before. Everybody wants a pill. Everybody wants a magic pill. I call it super-duper pill, whatever you want to call it, that you put in your mouth and it's done, right? We're fat, take a pill. We're not fat. We have hypertension, take a pill. We're not hypertensive. And if we could take a pill that makes all the puzzles and pokers in our mind and to maintain our brain active, we would take that pill as well. The reality is that at least so far, the pills are not working. We will get to good pills eventually, but there are other things we can do that are not pills. Physical activity is one of them, okay? There is plenty of literature showing that aerobic physical activity protects the brain. There is even literature in humans showing that hippocampus that I mentioned before, that is so responsible for many memory-related processes, grows when physical activity is done, all right? Obesity, and I'll put it together with diabetes. Let me ask you a question about those two. And those above 65 here in the United States, what is the percentage of people with either diabetes or pre-diabetes, let's say obesity? 50, good, that's the answer. 50% of the United States of America, those above the age of 65, have either type 2 diabetes or are about to get it. This is horrible, all right? And diabetes and obesity, they have serious deleterious chronic effects on the brain. This is a major area of research for us, so I believe so strongly in the data we see, all right? By the way, on all ages, it's about 25%, which is also terrible. So, because if you think about 300 million people, 25% have either diabetes or pre-diabetes. Hypertension is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease and is modifiable. Smoking. And then those two last ones are the ones that we know already because they relate to the heart, right? So we know already that if we take care of them, we're going to be healthy, at least in terms of our cardiovascular function. Now I'm telling you, it's not only your heart, it's also your brain. And then there are 2 risk factors that are related directly to the brain. Low cognitive activity, or if we want to look at it from the positive side, people who are cognitively active, and by active I really mean active, okay? So the whole thing of reading headlines of the New York Times don't work. All right? By active, I mean also the games that people like to play, right? All the trivias and so on. But also that if you read the newspapers, don't read only the headlines. Read the whole article and go and discuss with your husband, your wife, your children, whoever. Make a thought process out of it. Think that when we're thinking that we're making that effort, we're doing something good a little bit like moving a muscle. You stop it, it becomes weaker. And depression is a sensitive topic, and there is quite good literature suggesting that depression is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, but we don't really know why, okay? We don't know it's because they have a common pathology in the brain, or because a depressed person doesn't do physical activity, doesn't do cognitive activity, eats more, and so on. So we don't know exactly what is the way that depression affects deleteriously the brain, but there are plenty of studies showing that that's the case, including in our hands. All right, so now we say, if those are modifiable risk factors, so those are not genes, those are not gender, right? It's not age, that those are supposedly non-modifiable, those are modifiable risk factors. So we say, so maybe primary prevention can give us a better answer than 460 failed clinical trials. And there are 3 major clinical trials in the world on primary prevention. They all show in different levels some positive results. The strongest of them is called the Finger Study from Finland, and they really show very nicely that it's a study of people who are 7 years and older who are cognitively normal, so they don't have symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, but they have some of those risk factors. So they are treated for those risk factors. Those who are treated have a line that goes like this, okay, metaphorically speaking, and then those who are not treating have a line that their cognitive decline goes steeper, suggesting that if you address seriously your Alzheimer's disease risk factors, you will delay the disease. There's plenty more to do. There are another 3, when I say mega clinical trials, I mean 6,000 people participating in different parts of the world, and so on. The Finger Study is now being replicated in different areas of the world to make sure that it's not just something special to Finland, that it relates to the United States and other countries just as much. So relatively fresh from the oven, I think it was May 14th when the World Health Organization has defined dementia prevention recommendations. What they did, they took the literature on everything, it's a 170 pages report, and they admit that for some of the risk factors, the literature is not strong enough. And yet, they still believe that if as a population, as a whole, we all take care of those risk factors, on the long run, there will be less Alzheimer's disease cases, or they will be pushed to later. Now I ask you, because I ask myself, I ask my mom, all right? Let's assume that, theoretically speaking, you didn't do anything about those risk factors and you have some of them, and you would be diagnosed at the age of 75. Would you push it to 85 and be happy? Of course. All right. Why am I asking this question? Because so many times we talk about lifestyle and people kind of nod with empathy. And then they go and continue their smoking or whatever they're doing, right? And this way, I know all of us prefer a pill. And eventually, we will have a pill. The whole world is working. And we don't want 150 million Alzheimer's disease patients. Nobody wants it. And yet, there is something that we can do that has good likelihood, yet not well proven yet, to postpone the disease. Oh, this is just for anybody who wants. This is the website of the World Health Organization. Adopting a healthy lifestyle helps reduce the risk of dementia. Okay, this is the World Health Organization website. So we look at we have 2 major scientific goals. Now I'm going to try to put together the different pieces of what I have told you so far. All right? How am I doing with time? Because I'm all excited here, but maybe I'm not doing so well. Huh? So how much time do I have? Like 15? All right. Some do. Some do.
They don't remember.
All right. All right, so let's continue just a bit more. All right? So here is a major scientific goal, and remember, this is a double scientific goal. Finding technologies that can identify the very first steps of the disease, and in parallel, the biology underlying these first steps. So interventions can be provided in the optimal window of opportunity. Now I'm going to give some time to this. This is just a nice design that I did that I like to show off. But the idea is that we developed an Alzheimer's breakthrough program that has these 2 pathways that I just mentioned. The first one is early diagnosis pathway, redefining the symptomatology of Alzheimer's disease, testing novel technologies for very early ascertainment and monitoring of quote-unquote asymptomatic Alzheimer's disease, and I'm going to explain myself. I said before that the biology of the disease begins 20 to 30 years earlier than when the first real symptoms show up, right? And the person becomes forgetful and so on. Now, at the age of 40 and 50, if we test people with the way we test them today, which are neuropsychological tests, sometimes computerized ones, we'll get nothing, all right? People will show as if they're normal. Now, it's very probable that there are already symptoms, but that the natural senses of the human being cannot see them. And this is where all the new technologies, cell phone technologies, sensors, all those watches can come and help. Now imagine for a moment, and I'm telling you we're doing it, and it's quite incredible to see, that a doctor will sit and will get a window open saying, your 45 years old patient has reaction time has been consistently for the last 5 years like this, and in the last 2 months it's going like this. All right? Now that person doesn't feel it, his family members don't feel it, but the cell phone or the machine or those very sensitive sensors, they do feel it. All right? And the doctor calls that person to try to understand if there is something happening. Maybe it's depression, the person got slower. Maybe the person broke his leg and he's slower. And maybe it's something else. All right, so this is one direction that we're taking, bringing in new technologies, and I have to say that as someone who works in Israel, it's quite incredible. It's just it's a frame of mind there that the country will not survive if we don't bring 100 gazillion technologies every day. So I spend a lot of my time doing due diligence to technologies and deciding what has a true potential for Alzheimer's disease. And I'll give you a few examples. I do want to say, 4WinAD is those are 3 companies that, after a lot of thinking, we decided to do a proof of concept for them at the Sheba Medical Center. So we're testing their technologies on our patients. And the reason why it's 4WinAD, because it's 3 technologies and us, the scientists, and WinAD is Alzheimer's disease, so we want to win the disease. And also, most importantly, I have 0 financial conflict of interest with them, and I have 100 gazillion financial love conflict of interest with them. You start working with those companies, and again, now seriously speaking, I have no financial, I have no interest in the companies in any way. I just wanted to succeed for our cause and purposes. But you work with those people that are so intense in trying to find a solution that you fall in love with them, and love is a big conflict of interest because I want them to succeed. This technology here is a camera using a spectral technology. Honestly, I don't fully understand the mechanics of how that works. And it sits on the eye, and it, with a picture, takes 1,000 pictures of your retina, and is able to delineate if there is amyloid on your retina and if there are vascular changes, which probably, but we're not sure yet because this is what we're examining, reflect degenerative processes of the brain. Now today, if I want to see if someone has amyloid, I have to send them to a PET scan of amyloid. At Sinai, it costs about $5,000 per person for research. I don't want to know how much it costs for clinical purposes. And something like this, we will be able to do it every 2 months, every 6 months, every 10 months, whatever we decide. No radiation, no injection, no pricing. They would be much cheaper, and possibly a very good way for us to follow pathological processes through the retina. This technology here is a passive technology on the cell phone, all right? And what those guys are based on is, remember I told you in the pathology slide, I said acetylcholine is the first chemical neurotransmitter that goes down in Alzheimer's disease. That same chemical is the main chemical that takes responsibility for the functioning of the eye. So this is a camera, it uses a camera of a smartphone. You put the smartphone like this, pretty cool. You see your eyes. For those paranoids, they won't like it. And it films the movement of the eye. It films every parameter that the eye does. Okay, so from how much your pupil enlarges and contracts, how much you move, how many times you blink, and they put an algorithm that supposedly, we are looking into it, will tell us if there are significant changes in acetylcholine levels within the brain. And this is also a very cool technology, also passive, also cell phone or smartphone. And what they do, they build an algorithm, and this is all, for those who like artificial intelligence, they all cover artificial intelligence. In other words, it learns the person. All right, so they do it again and again and again and again, and the more you do it, the more the algorithm learns the person's behavior and knows to tell you when something is out of the ordinary. So in this technology, they put together a fluency of speech, amount of steps you do in places that you usually are at, like home, or in places that you're not at. Your reaction time. They began, by the way, which I thought is an interesting business pathway for them. One of the major issues, and I'm sure you will go like this to me, right? At the moment of the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease is the issue of driving. If any of you have an Alzheimer's patient at home or someone who you know, you'll know that's true. There is something enormous in taking away a driving license. All right? You take away the independence of that person and you tell them you have a disease and therefore you have no freedom anymore. All right? Now, saying that to the patient as a doctor is painful. Saying as a family member sometimes is almost impossible. All right? What those guys are doing is developing, so this technology is broader, okay? It looks at cognition and behavior in a broader way, but it gives a tool to the family and to the doctor that it follows the patient. So the patient has the cell phone on him, and he's driving, all right? And it catches the amount of times the person brakes, how fast the pace of the person brakes, how fast the patient turns the wheel, and so on, and builds up a story about the driving of that person. And a window will open up in the phone of that family member that takes care for this patient and the doctor and say, there is a decline, there is a dysregulation. And then you come with an objective tool. You don't just say, listen, you have the Alzheimer's disease, you can't drive anymore. You say, here are proofs that it became dangerous and you have to get off it. So all those technologies are very exciting, and as I said, we're doing the proof of concept, and I truly believe that through these kind of things, we're going to redefine the symptomatology. So if today we call it memory impairment through testing face-to-face or with computer, in the future, we'll say there is global cognitive change in the application, blah, 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 that started in the last 2 months. We have to follow this person. It's going to look at cognition in a far, far more subtle way, and in a way that we can grasp at the age of 40 and 50 and don't have to wait when we're 7 and the brain is dead. So now let's have a look at the other piece of our model, which is the earliest biological alterations. So we want to define the earliest biological changes of Alzheimer's disease through omics that I promise you that I'm going to try to explain to discover new treatments, okay? That's a line of research. Not everybody has to do it. We feel it's a very important and big line of research. Let me just tell you in a few words what omics are, okay? It's very difficult. If you talk to omics people, if you talk to the biostatisticians and the bioinformaticians, the people that do the data analyses, they will have a hard time explaining it to you, all right? And the reason it's very complex. Let me just give you a few words about this, okay? Omics refers to the collective technologies used to explore the roles, relationships, and actions of the various types of molecules that make up the cells of an organism. In our case, we're interested in human organism, all right? Through omics, you understand health and you understand disease, all right? We always talk disease, you understand health as well. You guys, when I said genome, you reacted as that you're familiar with that. So genomics is the study you take all the genome, and you don't study one gene and see if certain people have it versus others don't. You don't study if this is transcriptome, if the expression of the gene goes up, one gene going up or down. You look at the whole system of a human being and you make a story of it, okay? And there are technologies today that are trying to make a story that makes sense. And then it won't be one gene. It will be a hub gene that affects 17 genes that affects some proteins, okay? And then the treatment will be on those different levels, and this is why we keep saying it's a multi-targeted treatment. It's not gonna be on one thing, which I think will respond to one of the topics that I told you before, that we're having trouble, we're not hitting the right target. Through omics, we believe we will hit the right targets. And I think now I'm going to finalize. And this lady is called Madame Jean-Louis Calment. I think there is one in Japan that died a little after her. She died at 122, and I think that Japanese lady died at 124. Now here's the deal, all right? She started fencing at the age of 85. She biked until she was 100. She smoked until she was 117, and now for all the smokers, she smoked 2 cigarettes, and God knows why she stopped at 117. I have no clue, but she did. And she drank port wine every day, 1 glass. And the best of all, for someone like me who's completely addicted to chocolate, she ate 2.5 pounds of chocolate per week. So, but what is really important here, she died in peace at the age of 122, cognitively normal, okay? And this is where we want to go. Thank you. Thank you. I have my pack here.
Okay. So everybody can hear me too, yeah? So we covered a lot of ground there. Everybody's head spinning there, yeah. So even as an MD, that was a lot of ground to cover. But I think when I see patients in my own clinic who are worried about their memory, almost universally, the first question I get is about family history and genetics. And well, grandma had trouble, does that mean I'm gonna have trouble? Or my sister has trouble, does that mean I'm gonna have trouble? So in terms of the genetics and the genomics and the more complicated transcription and other changes to the DNA, what would you say is the genetic component that we know right now for the contribution to Alzheimer's disease specifically?
Right. So this is a broad question, and I'll have to respond to it a little bit in different levels, okay? The first thing people want to know, if I have a family member, first degree typically, that has Alzheimer's, is am I at high risk? And the answer is yes. However, this risk has to do with the age of onset of your family member, all right? So if your let's say your father had Alzheimer's disease onset at the age of 65, your risk as a first-degree family member is higher than that of someone whose father developed Alzheimer's disease at the age of 80 or 85. And in fact, for people who develop Alzheimer's disease after the age of 90, there may be even protective factors, because as I showed you in the graph, after the age of 90, we have a higher risk of having the disease and not having it. All right, so the risk of a first-degree family member of developing the disease is associated with the age of onset of their family member who was sick. Okay, so that's the first thing. With regard to the genetics, also I'm going to take two directions, okay? One is the ApoE4 gene, and there is one gene. Let me one step back. There is, anybody here watch Still Alice? Yes, okay. So Alice in the movie, she has early onset Alzheimer's disease, all right? Early onset Alzheimer's disease is about 2% of the Alzheimer's population. It's a rare condition. It happens very early, typically before the age of 60, often at the 40s, okay? And it's causal. There are 3 mutations that cause the disease. You have the mutation, you will have the disease. All right, many times people ask, why don't we check ourselves from the beginning? Because it's very rare, all right? If it was more common, probably people would be checking themselves more often. So those are let's say 1-2% of the Alzheimer's disease patients. Then there is all the rest, right? What we call the sporadic cases. For those sporadic cases, there is one risk gene, and I want to emphasize the word risk, okay? Before I said it's causal. There is a mutation, you'll have the disease. When it's a risk gene, it means it increases the risk of the disease. There is this gene called ApoE, and it has 3 types, 2, 3, and 4. We get one from mom and one from dad, so we can be a 2-2, 2-3, 2-4, and so on. People who carry the 4 are at increased risk, and again, that risk is higher at earlier ages. So people who are 80 or 85 and carry the ApoE4 gene, that gene almost has no effect anymore on the risk of having Alzheimer's disease. But generally speaking, for example, at Sinai, we have a very big brain bank, a brain repository. We have 3,000 brains. And the vast majority are people that were related to our studies of Alzheimer's disease. So if the general community has about 22% ApoE4, in our brain bank we have over 40%, all right? So they're overrepresented. And the last piece of answer, I'm sorry, but you asked.
It's complicated.
You asked, and so. The last piece of answer is that if we were completely focused on this ApoE4 gene until not too long ago, today with the genomics and with the GWAS, with the bigger genetic studies, we're able to look at a more subtle genes, or genes that make an effect but not as big as the ApoE, all right? So not too long ago, Nature, which is the #1 paper in the medical field, published a study with an enormous number of subjects, hundreds of thousands, and showed 25 genes that have been implicated in Alzheimer's disease. ApoE4 is always #1, but there are several others that are quite important. And why is it so complicated? Because different people have different combinations of those genes, and some of them will have some protective genes while having some risk gene, and how those communicate or how they interact to provoke or actually to prevent the disease, we don't know yet, and this is where omics get into place.
So at this point, with the current scientific landscape, would you recommend people testing themselves genetically right now with direct-to-consumer genetic testing with 23andMe? How do you feel about opening that Pandora's box in terms of genetic testing when we still don't understand all of the implications?
It's a very good question. And honestly, there is a major ethical question behind this, and I don't have a good answer. I can tell you that I think there is a major personal component. Certain people prefer knowing. I'm one of them. And certain people prefer not to know because we don't have a good tool now we have all the prevention. Are we good?
He wanted me forward,
Oh,
so
I
you
see.
see the whole,
Okay, very
the whole
good.
thing.
In any case, so we don't have a cure, right? But now, up to now, we said we don't have a cure. We don't say what the ApoE4 genotype is. But now with those new prevention studies, we start asking ourselves, wait a minute. If someone, by the way, there are a few studies, you might be familiar with them, showing that ApoE4 positives who know that they're positive, they're far more adherent to prevention than those who aren't. So they get scared, they take it seriously, and they do a major effort to prevent the disease or to postpone it. So then the question is again, should we tell people or not? Right? The same with the amyloid PET, right? Amyloid PET, you come, you do a PET scan of your brain, and you might have amyloid in your brain. We don't know exactly what it means. It's a risk factor, all right? It's a major pathology, but in old age, many people have it, and either they didn't get old enough to develop the disease, or it's there and who knows why. We don't know yet. So to tell people or not. Now I'll tell you, there is a major effect of culture. Since I'm both here and in Israel, I can tell you that at Sinai, the overall gist, it's changing. It's changing, but the overall direction is not to tell anything, so people do their ApoE and their amyloid, and unless they're in a clinical trial that is treating specifically those people and therefore they will know they have it, they're not told. In Israel, nobody will participate in my studies if I don't tell them. That's the reality. So they do know, and we're actually collecting data now on their reaction on anxiety, depression, how if they're making life changes, and we're going to report it hopefully in the next AAC. Oh man, my pec is.
Oh, your tiny ears, yeah.
Yeah. All right.
So, and in terms of counseling, what I tell people is act like you are ApoE4 homozygous. It doesn't matter what your actual genetics are, just pretend like you are.
Right.
But I think the most important point is that genetics, as right now, and family history, yes, it increases your risk, but these modifiable risk factors are going to play a much larger role. And in terms of taking care of yourself, all the more important if you have a family history as well. In terms of those modifiable risk factors, and I'm so happy that that's where you focus, because I spend my whole day in clinic telling people to exercise and eat right and to sleep. And you didn't talk about sleep as much. And there has been more recent studies coming out saying that people either start sleeping more in the years before they're diagnosed with Alzheimer's, or the effect that chronic insomnia, which is also an epidemic, plays in developing neurodegenerative diseases. How do you feel about sleep and counseling people on their sleep?
So, every July we have our annual Alzheimer's meeting. It's called the AAIC, it's the Alzheimer's Association International Conference. And the people who do the plenary sessions, we're 5, 6, 7,000 people, right? The people who do the plenary sessions are people who are leaders in their particular field that that their research is. And this year there was a sleep expert trying to convince that that's a major risk factor, and she did not convince me. That's the reality. That's, again, logically speaking, right, it makes a lot of sense that if we don't sleep well, if we don't sleep enough, that if the pattern of our sleep is not working right, then it might be doing something bad to the brain, or alternatively, the brain, some processes are doing bad to it. And this is where she didn't convince me. She didn't convince me that problems in sleep are causing dementia, but rather that dementia is causing problems in sleep.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and I get that question all the time too, especially when I see young people, and young for us is less than 65, that is right. Young for us in our clinic, and they're complaining about their memory, but they're not sleeping, or they're stressed, or they have small children, and there's a more direct effect that lack of sleep has. Obviously, that's why we changed how we train physicians, right? Because we worked at 80 hours a week, and none of us were sleeping, and we made mistakes. So sleep deprivation causes memory loss, but that connection between neurodegenerative disease, that's what remains to be proven, sure. Absolutely. So in terms of those modifiable risk factors that have better evidence right now, diet absolutely plays a large role. There's been more studies coming out of Rush Medical Center in Chicago in terms of specifically the Mediterranean-style diet, or the MIND diet, which is a low-sodium Mediterranean-style diet. Can you comment a little bit more specifically on what that diet would involve and the evidence behind that?
Right, so the MIND diet is still being tested, right? That's Martha Clare. Mm-hmm. And so we don't know yet, although they went into this study because they thought it's a lot of nuts. Those people get kilograms of nuts to their homes and they eat them. And so then you get depressed. What are you doing? No, but honestly, we both know well the investigator, and she's just the most marvelous, serious, and incredible investigator. She's doing a very good job. The Mediterranean diet is like today in the morning, we had some very beautiful breakfast in the Newman's family, and everybody was eating delicious bagels, and I told them just to imagine that it's all based on olive oil. So the Mediterranean diet, it's a lot of, very little meat, a lot of fish, a lot of vegetables, fruits, nuts, and olive oil. And of all the diets, that's the one that has some positive effects, okay? There is still more to do. We need to do it in different populations, with different genetic backgrounds, but it's a positive direction. But I want to give just a minute to discuss the issue of diet, because so many times people ask about nutrients, right? And with nutrients, we have a serious problem, which ends up being an ethical problem that we don't fully find a way to deal with. And why is that? I'm going to stick to vitamin E because it's just convenient, all right? But it's true for vitamin D, it's true for B12, for folate, for any of them. There is plenty of literature showing that vitamin E is an antioxidant. All right, so it has been used or it has been tested to treat complications of diabetes, heart attack, and so on. And there are enough studies in animal models showing that if you give Alzheimer genetically modified mice that develop Alzheimer's disease, if you feed them with vitamin E or you inject them vitamin E, they will have less pathology in their brain, and their behavior, their memory will stay better. So from there, you say, okay, so the next step, we have to test it in clinical trials in humans. And several clinical trials with vitamin E have been done in the world, and except for one in Holland that was successful, i.e. people who took a vitamin E had less decline in cognition, and all the other studies failed. Now, why is that? They started trying to investigate where is this problem and where it's different coming from. And that population in Holland just happens to be vitamin E deficient, all right? Now, think of it, that it's a very important point. If you treat someone with a nutrient, and that person has normal levels of the nutrient, The body's smart and gets rid of what is unnecessary. There is no point in treating someone who has normal levels to supernormal levels, right? And now then the question is, okay, so let's do a clinical trial for vitamin E and bring people who are vitamin E deficient, right? And then we'll treat them. But then what do you say to the person that has vitamin E deficiency? 50% chance you will receive placebo. I know you have a problem, but I'm not going to treat it. So that becomes a serious ethical problem for us, and I think this is one of the reasons, and I think that is a good reason for having gone to more complex diets, which is what the science is about now.
Yeah. And segueing off of that, in terms of the supplements and vitamins and things that are sold in this country where the FDA is not required to approve supplements and vitamins, and promises being made regarding the effectiveness of things to people who are desperate for something, for that pill that we do not have right now, in terms of the ethics of that, but also the proof right now that there are no vitamins or supplements that will prevent Alzheimer's disease.
That's correct. And if anything, by the way, in the context of nutrition, the data is that the food, if it has if the vitamins or the nutrients have a positive effect on health and in the brain, it's through the food and not through the pills.
Yes.
Just saying.
Yes. Yes. Exercise, eat real food, take care of yourself, use your brain, and importantly, those games and brain teasers, Lumosity, this kind of online thing, studies have shown you get really good at those games, does not necessarily translate to your life otherwise. And another presentation at the AAIC this year was about learning new things specifically. So you're already showing, you're coming here to learn new things, right? But then what Dr. Beeri mentioned, using that information. So it's not enough just to passively absorb things. You have to use that information and learn something new, even if you don't get good at it, right? Everybody gives the example of learning a new language, which is impossible over the age of 3 unless you live in that culture. But even if you try, it doesn't matter how good you get at it, you have the same benefit. And learning more new things at the same time has more benefit. So every day in my clinic, I'm telling people, exercise, eat right, take care of yourself, use your brain in a way that is fun. So you don't have to be studying and doing homework. You use your brain in a way that brings you joy. So I think those are the questions I have. I want to make sure we have time to get to some audience questions. I'm sure there are a ton of them. So we will attempt to address those for you.
We'd like to ask, when you do ask your question, to please stand up, and always say this, only because we don't have a lot of time. Try to make your questions concise and to the point. Thank you.
Frank Lang, you mentioned hypertension as one of the risk factors. If you're taking medicine to reduce your blood pressure, is that helping the situation, or is that not relevant?
All right, so that's a very good question. I'm going to repeat it just if some people at the back didn't hear. The question is if someone has hypertension and is being treated with medications for hypertension, if this is good. So there is some good evidence, including recent evidence, suggesting that a decrease in systolic blood pressure, right, we have systolic and diastolic, does decrease the risk for mild cognitive impairment and dementia. In any case, that's crucial because you cannot be walking around with high blood pressure because you'll die of something else. And but there is let me take 1 minute for that because it's important because there is such a big high prevalence of hypertension. There is a literature concept called the Cochrane Review. All right, the Cochrane Review comes from England. It's a governmental funded institution, and what they do, they take clinical trials of a particular type, for example, for hypertension, with an outcome of Alzheimer's disease. So they want to know, does treating hypertension for Alzheimer's disease is helping? And they take all the clinical trials that have been done in this topic. They have their statistical mumbo-jumbo that kind of equalizes all the studies if it was one big study instead of 5,000 people on 30,000 people. And the Cochrane Review says that there is a small but positive effect size. All right, but now, last year there was a big study, a very big study, with, I think it was ACE inhibitors, if I'm not mistaken, which is one type of hypertension medication, suggesting some small positive effects. So yeah.
Treat your high blood pressure.
Is there a connection between sleep medication and Alzheimer's?
You take that one for me.
Yes, thank you for asking that. So just to repeat, a connection between sleeping medications, so we did talk about sleep on its own, but we didn't talk about the sleep medications, and Alzheimer's disease. I have cured quite a few cases of dementia by getting people off of sleeping medications, okay? Sleeping medications are bad. There are none that are without risk. Melatonin, that's over the counter, works very well for jet lag, works okay for sleep. The thing that works best for sleep is focusing on your sleep and making it a priority. Most of the prescription medications that are out there, Ambien, Lunesta, Benadryl, Unisom, all these over-the-counter, Tylenol PM. I've seen people taking 5 or 6 Benadryl every night to sleep and that they can't sleep without it. You are not sleeping, you're unconscious, okay? So the most important thing, and it's such a problem because modern life is go, 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 do, 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 stay up until midnight watching the news and getting all depressed about everything going on in the world, and then you try to sleep. And you have the TV in your room, you got your phone on the bedside table, the dog's jumping in the bed. So everybody expects the brain just to go to sleep with all of these modern inconveniences. So sleep hygiene, which is going to bed and waking up at the same time every day no matter what. Having the bedroom be cool, dark, and relaxing, and only for sleep and intimacy. That's all that happens in the bedroom. Get the TV and your phone out of your bedroom. Get the pets out of your bedroom. Yeah. They wake you up. They wake you up. And making sure you're spending enough time in bed, but not watching the clock, right? The people that watch the clock, now it's 10, now it's 11, now it's 12, they're not gonna sleep. So the most effective thing for sleeping is sleep hygiene. If it's bad enough, something called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is basically training your brain to sleep again. Because for millennia, we went to bed when the sun went down and we woke up when the sun came up, and that's what our brain is still used to. It's only been 110 years with electric lights. All of the sleep medications have memory side effects. And the number one on that list, because everybody says it's over the counter, it's safe, is Benadryl, diphenhydramine. That is what is in all of the over-counter sleep aids, Unisom, Tylenol PM, ZQuil, and it is not safe for your brain. It blocks acetylcholine, that chemical that is already decreased, and what all the other medications boost, the ones that are FDA approved. So all of the sleep medications are unsafe. They cause memory loss. Do they increase the risk of Alzheimer's? Right? That's always that hard thing to prove causation-wise, but we know that it prevents memory formation overnight.
Hi, my name is Hannah Lang, and I have a question. You had the slide on the screen about the various cells that are
Pathology,
affected, the
yeah.
pathology and
Yeah.
all of that kind of stuff. How do you get that information? I was always under the impression that that information is only available
Postmortem.
postmortem. How do you have that information now, and how can we rely on it?
Okay, so this is a very good question, okay? So I'm repeating the question. She's saying I showed several pathologies in the brain. How do we see them? How do we know they're there, all right? So yeah, it's an excellent question. Until not too many years ago, there was no way to see them at all right? And it was really just post-mortem. The amyloid and tau, we can measure them in cerebrospinal fluid, right? Which is the fluid that washes the brain and the spinal cord. You tap in just like an epidural. You take some liquid out and it can measure it there. A little bit paradoxically, low levels of amyloid in the spinal cord mean a lot of amyloid, in the fluid mean a lot of amyloid in the brain, which is kind of a little counterintuitive. But, and yet we're not sure where is it sitting and if it's really, really reflecting what's happening in the brain. With the years, there are tracers that are used with PET scan. So you inject a material that goes into the brain and glues into where amyloid is and lightens up when you look in the PET scan, so you know how much there is and where it is. Okay? They're very well correlated. There are a few companies that have it. They're very well correlated with postmortem amyloid, suggesting that it's really there. Okay? So there is amyloid PET, there is tau PET. Amyloid PET is already approved for clinical purposes. There is a very big study in the world called IDEAS, the guy who runs it is Gil Rabinovich from UCSF, a very bright neurologist. And he looked at 16,000 people who have been diagnosed with something, okay, with mild cognitive impairment, with some kind of dementia. And they did an amyloid scan to see if, according to the result of that scan, the doctor will make a change in their decision. Their hypothesis was that 30% of the doctors will make a change in their decision according to the amyloid PET result. And what happened is that almost 70% of the doctors made a change in their decision. What kind of changes? If the person was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease and the doctor was treating with cholinesterase inhibitors, with those medications to improve acetylcholine, and the scan was clean of amyloid, many of the doctors stopped giving acetylcholine. I'm not even sure it's the right decision. You probably agree with me. But many doctors stopped. The opposite happened also. People whose course of disease didn't really look like Alzheimer's disease, a little confusing. The doctor said it's some other kind of dementia, not Alzheimer's disease. They do an amyloid scan, they're full of amyloid, the doctor puts them on that medication, and so on and so forth. So this has been very, very useful. What we don't know yet, and this is the last stage of this IDEA study, is if this change in decision of the doctor is doing good for the patient long term, okay? Now, just to finalize answering your specific questions, so there is amyloid PET, tau PET that is still in research process. It has not been yet approved for clinical purposes. For microglia, which are those cells that the immune cells of the brain, there are initial studies for PET scans. So this is the general direction. The same for the synaptic proteins. There is a synaptophysin. There is a specific protein that can already be traced and seem to be giving results that really reflect what's happening really in the brain, and so on and so forth. So we are progressing in that direction, plus the novel technologies that are less invasive and that might be able, for example, to use the retina to reflect brain processes.
And Medicare does not yet pay for an amyloid PET scan. So I've had a lot of people coming into my clinic asking for this new scan. It is not paid for, and at least Anschutz charges $15,000 out of pocket, which is neither here nor there. But they have to be ordered in the right clinical situation. So in terms of screening somebody with no memory trouble, do I have amyloid in my brain? It also opens that issue of the ethical implications. So right now they are only ordered in situations where it is clinically unclear, because these are clinical diagnoses, and 100% definitive diagnosis comes after death.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
Currently caretaking a doctor who has Alzheimer's. One of his doctor friends who is studying in Chicago studying Alzheimer's in Chicago, came and brought us this drug called Percepta Professional. Does that sound familiar to you? The key ingredients were 00703 cat's claw, Memorti, and black currant. And he told him, I'm not sure it's even on the market yet, but asked him to start taking this he's already in the mid stages of Alzheimer's, so it won't prevent it, but at least maybe stop the progression.
Yeah, at least by its list of ingredients, it sounds more like a dietary supplement, of which are not required to be FDA approved, so you can sell basically anything and say that it cures anything. Prevagen is the big one. They're really good at advertising. It's the one made out of jellyfish. And they say, oh, it's clinical trial proven, it works. I looked up that clinical trial. It was 8 people, and none of them had Alzheimer's. Yeah. So you have to be really careful with anything that is marketed direct to consumers. The pluses and minuses of the rigorous requirements for FDA approval for drugs, yes, it is, onerous, a process to go through, but you need to prove that things work, and you need to prove that they don't hurt people. So generally, when people come into my clinic and they bring, the garbage bag full of all these things that they found on the internet, or their cousin, or the neighbor down the road said, try this, I don't have any evidence base. And also, being here in here in Colorado, I also get the marijuana question all the time. In terms of if that helps anything. We have no idea. It's not proven. So it's my job as a clinician to keep people safe and keep them from being harmed. And I understand that people are desperate, and I don't have a lot to offer that is evidence-based. other than exercise and diet and taking care of yourself. But almost everything that's out there right now that's sold as a dietary supplement has no evidence base.
As far as Alzheimer's, is there a difference between the male side or the female side? Which are affected more?
All right. So I'll answer in two levels. I think your question is a straightforward one. Who has a higher risk of having Alzheimer's disease? Are there men or women? And the answer is women. About 2/3 of the Alzheimer's patients are women. And this is, I always laugh, this is the moment that all the guys kind of sit comfortable on their chair, right? Don't worry, you have a bunch of out of blah. All right?
The other stuff gets you first.
You have more cerebrovascular disease, you have more, a bunch of other things that you have more bipolar disorder, so women have more Alzheimer's disease than men. The pattern of the disease, generally speaking, does not look different. There is a whole trend now to try to understand, because women have 2 to 3 times more Alzheimer's disease than men, there is a whole trend now, the National Institutes of Health are obligating us as scientists to specifically look in every piece of research that we do, if whatever we're investigating is different in men and women. I don't think that we have anything strong to say that the disease, except the risk of developing the disease, that women have more. One thing that has gone for a long time, and it is an important question, let me ask the audience for a moment, when a disease has a clear preference for one of the genders, what do we think about? Hormone, thank you. People typically say raising our kids or something like that. So, but the answer is primarily hormones. The whole issue of hormones is very interesting. When you look at large populations, women who do take hormones for a hormone replacement therapy, they're at lower risk. If you look at the brain is full of receptors for estrogen, clearly suggesting that estrogen has a major role in brain functioning. When you look at animal models that are treated with estrogen, they have a better behavior, a better memory, and their brain looks better, and so on. So once again, a major clinical trial has been done on estrogen and progesterone. It doesn't matter on hormone replacement therapy. This is many years ago. The World Health, it's the World Health Initiative memory study. And unfortunately, they took 6,000 women, half of them receiving treatment, half not, all of them above the age of 65, all of them have never received hormones in their lives. They treat them with hormones. The study stopped after a couple of years because those who were taking hormones were developing more Alzheimer's disease. And then people freaked out and said, how is this possible? And the answer seemed to be quite simple and painful. The doctors don't treat a woman with hormone replacement therapy after the age of 65. A woman is treated at around the age of 50 when menopause occurs. So now there are some new efforts trying to get the studies backwards and try to see around the menopause what happens and if this affects the brain. Yeah. Yes.
My question, I think, is pretty simple. The answer to sleep aids causing Alzheimer's, what about pain medications?
Yeah, another really good question. So pain medications. So when you go to the doctor and you say, this is going on, the answer almost always is, here's a pill for that, right? Here's a pill for that. And as doctors, we always want to try to make things better, and we have a shorter and shorter amount of time to do that with you. So instead of getting, I have the luxury of being at an academic center, I get an hour and a half with my patients, so I can really talk through all of these things. But in a 10-minute primary care appointment, you say, my knee hurts, here's a pill for that. So most pain medications that are prescription are in the family of opiate medications, right? Your Vicodins, your Norcos, even Tramadol, which was initially kind of marketed as safer than those. They all have deleterious effects on the brain, all of them. And not only, the huge problem of opioid addiction now in this country. So we've kind of swung the pendulum back where we used to say, nobody should be in pain, we want zero pain. Like, what kind of human being has zero pain? Like, that's just not part of being a human being. So we've swung back now where we're very cautious and careful, especially especially in older people. So the effects that these medications for long-term use, so if you have your hip done and you get a week's worth, of Vicodin after your surgery, that's fine, but we don't want you on something for months and months. So anything prescription-wise, over-the-counter, Tylenol, Advil, those types of things generally are fine. A few decades ago, there were some studies showing that people taking anti-inflammatory drugs, like NSAIDs, had lower risks of Alzheimer's, so then they started giving people NSAIDs, and that didn't work out. So there's something different. It's not the drug, it's kind of analogous to the hormone thing. You can't just, have a one-size-fits-all for these drugs. But any prescription medication, you got to be really careful. Ask your doctor, do I really need this? Is there an alternative? Can I get off of this? Every single person that comes into my clinic, we go through each medicine. Why are you on this? How long have you been on this? Get off of whatever you can that's not absolutely necessary.
Can you also comment on the effect of statins on memory loss?
Yeah. So, again, asking your
Make it
doctor,
simple.
do I
Nothing.
need this? Yeah, we don't have enough proof either way. If you have high enough cholesterol that you're at a risk for a heart attack or stroke, you need to treat that. Some people want to do the diet and exercise route, absolutely, if you can accomplish that with lifestyle modifications, but the risks of dying from a heart attack or stroke are probably higher than the potential risk of something being a problem down the road. We do not have enough kind of cause and effect research to say you need to stop these things.
But there is a Cochrane review, all right? I mentioned before the Cochrane review that takes all the clinical trials that have been done on a particular topic. So there is this Cochrane review on statins and Alzheimer's disease, and the answer is nothing. Statins do not protect against Alzheimer's disease.
Protects you against a heart attack or stroke, though.
They do. Yeah.
We have time for just one more question. And this
We'll stay a
man's
little
hand is
bit.
hand
Both
up
of us will stay a
forever.
little bit.
You mentioned something about the technology of new technology that would facilitate early detection.
Yes.
And my question is there any evidence that early detection either delays or prevents onset or somehow has a positive quality of life effect? And more generally, what do you do with early detection?
Okay. So that's both sides of your question are very good, all right? They're very important questions. The first thing is, let me take the second piece of your question, right? We all say, what's the point of me knowing at the age of 40 that at the age of 75 I'm going to have Alzheimer's disease? The answer is, and I mentioned or I touched it before, until the whole prevention clinical trials and all this massive data and the World Health Organization adopting prevention recommendations, I would stick to saying either I don't know or each person on his own. You want to know, you know, and you don't want to know, it's okay. Today, I debate with myself quite often if knowing that there are prevention measures, if it's not better that or maybe I'll take your position, right? If it doesn't matter what your risk is, you should do everything not to have the disease. That said, I mentioned before, with the ApoE4 gene, which is a gene that increases the risk, I am familiar with 6 studies because I keep following that literature very closely because of a study that we're running now. Let me try to say that he behaved most of the time there. So with ApoE4, there are 6 studies showing that if a person knows they have it, they tend to be more adherent to the prevention measures, all right? And it might be, let's remember, people who smoke know they shouldn't be smoking. People who are obese know they shouldn't be obese. All right? People who are couch potatoes know they shouldn't be couch potatoes, and still we all do things that are not good for our health. So it's a behavioral question of why, when something is sufficiently scary, we might make that little change. All right? Now, I'm going to take parentheses for a moment. The vast majority of people who smoked and had a heart attack, then they had heart surgery, they fixed their hearts, and it takes 6 months for them to go back to smoking. That said, there is a study here in the US that showed that in middle age, people who are 40s and 50s, they're far, far more afraid of Alzheimer's disease than any other disease. They prefer losing a leg due to diabetes than developing Alzheimer's disease. And therefore I have this absurd hope that if we do know that we're increased risk will be stronger in sticking to the right lifestyle. Thank you.
And also in terms of including people into clinical trials, right? So we need to know earlier if people, what they have, and specifically what type of dementia they have, because there are other kinds other than Alzheimer's disease. And if you're including people with a different type of disease into a clinical trial, of course it's going to fail. So early detection will not only help with better care, it does. It's shown that people do better over time, that they're safer, that you plan better for the future, that things are in place earlier, and you avoid other complications. But there's also the implications that it have on research, making sure that we know what people have as early as possible so that we can intervene in the right way.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.